Chapter 21. They approached their destination on foot, having exited their bus at a nearby building so they could walk the final stretch. Daniel struggled, weighed down by the heavy PMC backpack, face still tender and puffy from being punched by Robertson. Soreness crept through his muscles, unaccustomed to this level of physical exertion and punishment. Anna had suggested avoiding the bus for the final stretch, reasoning that the transport dock was certainly under surveillance. This way gave Daniel a chance to hack into the building's security systems before getting close enough for cameras to catch them. He surveyed the area. This district hadn't been designed for casual strolling. The buildings stood closer to one another than in other areas of Houston, and the space between them was blanketed by wide segments of concrete, not grass. This made ground transportation an option for hauling cargo, though such vehicles had a limited range due to the rest of the city disallowing ground travel for anything larger than a single-person cycle. Daniel supposed the concrete existed to avoid the expense of maintaining synthetic grass, more than any kind of utility. Either way, it gave the area an unfriendly industrial feel accentuated by the late hour. Well after midnight, their footfalls were the only sound disrupting the silence. The building itself wasn't tall, similar to its neighbors. Reaching up 6 stories high, it had a transport dock on the roof, allowing for much easier on- and offloading of goods, and could even support a hover car. Its base had a gate made up of 2 enormous doors for receiving ground-level transports. Daniel assumed, based on the massive hinges and the discolored rust that spread across it, that it was a relic of days past. A smaller door stood beside the gate, nondescript, unpainted, and sized for human entry. When they were within range, Daniel pulled up short and Anna stopped next to him. "Let's see what I can do." He probed the building with his data lens. It took him a handful of seconds to identify the security protocol, but once he did, he had no problem finding a matching hack. Anna appraised him as he worked. "How have you ever kept up with all this?" He grinned. "Chalk it up to the strong motivation of a beautiful woman. I had to know the hacks if I wanted to keep you protected." She rolled her eyes. "You love this stuff." His smile broadened. "I've never denied it. Now, give me a moment and let me focus." A few minutes later, he had access to the building's security system, and he flicked the connection over to her so that she had it too. A structural layout glowed before him, 4 maps of lines and labels. The top 2 levels of the building each spanned 2 stories apiece, filling what normally would be the 3rd through 6th floors. He switched to an inventory view and a lengthy list of items and their locations appeared. No surprise, it's a warehouse. He backed out to the route information screen. The entire building and everything in it are owned by Office Solutions. Or Radon Security, according to our assumption. Anna tapped her data lens. "I have the agency code to open the door." Daniel held up a finger. "Give me 2 seconds and we'll use it. Your access code won't turn off the cameras or prevent security from being alerted." "Fortunately, it looks like we're only dealing with one person on the inside. Top floor, near the main dock. I'm glad we didn't come in that way." "Yes, down here will be much safer. We should be good to go once the cameras are looping, which they are now." As they began creeping forward again, Daniel prepared himself for more trespassing, though this time the risk was a bit higher than a bachelor pad had been. "What's our plan?" "Let's start with the stolen MMDs. They might be a red herring, but I'd love to make sure." "I'll see if I can find them. Unfortunately, there are loads of MMDs logged in their inventory. Maybe we can check intake dates and work from there." "Look for anything that came in on the 5th. Daniel paused to initiate a query, then followed Anna as she walked up to the door and opened it with her agency code. That it swung on hinges rather than disassembling and relocating to a wall cavity demonstrated just how old and unused it was. He switched to the vid feeds and identified the camera that would be recording their approach had it not been hacked. Now, it looped over older footage instead. Satisfied, he peered through the doorway into a small waiting room with a window on one side and a second door opposite them. An old, musty smell drifted into his nostrils, and Daniel suspected this part of the building hadn't been utilized for anything business-related in years. The lights popped on as they stepped inside, revealing yellow-tinged walls and a gray-tiled floor. Anna stopped to listen, hand hovering over the weapon at her waist, but neither of them heard a sound. A notification grabbed Daniel's attention, and he checked the results of his search. "Looks like I found your missing tablets." He scanned the details. "If it's them, the whole lot is in the big storeroom on the 3rd level. 40 MMDs received on the 5th. Excellent. Anna slowed to study the data, then resumed walking at a brisker pace as her lips curled into a pleased smile. Daniel followed. There's not much on the bottom 2 floors. They must be storing stuff long-term down here, and anything new is held closer to the transport dock along with some raw materials. It makes sense, as that's where they must do their shipping and receiving. I also suspect it's why they don't have anyone stationed down here. They navigated through one of the many rooms on the ground floor, and Anna gestured at the area around them. There's a lot of consumer-grade security gear here, but no weapons. She was right. MMDs and surveillance equipment filled boxes and pallets, but none of it was weaponized. Everything looked typical for security form, but why was it all off the books and assigned to a shell corporation? Daniel connected to some of the devices, noting their details, location histories, model numbers, capabilities, and other data that varied in usefulness. Unable to wade through it all immediately, he set his data lens to store the information for inspection later. The units on this level were older, mostly obsolete and unregistered. He couldn't verify whether any of it belonged to Radon. It took them a few minutes to get to the stairs and up to the 3rd floor. Daniel alternated between inventory scans and the map, paying special attention to the guard. Thus far, it seemed their presence had gone undetected. After stepping out of the stairwell, they found themselves in a cavernous room quite different from those on the ground level. Its smooth metallic walls and floors were clean and well maintained. Dozens of shelves surrounded them, each containing a variety of devices. As Daniel noted before, this floor spanned 2 stories, putting many items on the highest shelves out of reach. 2 mechanized aerial lifts stood in the center of the room for inspecting inventory without having to shift it around. Consumer MMDs weren't allowed to levitate platforms with people on them the way Anna's service weapon could, so this had to be done the old-fashioned way. Tablets, surveillance equipment, and PMCs lined the shelves. Daniel's data lens continued to connect and catalog them, but he couldn't archive everything. As he followed Anna through the room, he adjusted the automated process to scan at random. As soon as they entered the 2nd room on the floor, Daniel's program displayed an error message. He yelled ahead to Anna. "Hold up!" She stopped and turned to face him. "What's up?" He walked over to a nearby shelf. It was covered in tablets, like many others, but something about them struck him as off. They were larger and bulkier than usual, almost appearing dated. These MMDs, there's something weird going on. Anna moved up next to him, eyes sweeping the table. Older models? I can't tell. Based on my connection, the OS is nothing I've encountered before. What does that mean? I'm not sure. They're using a normal protocol, so I'm not having any trouble connecting, but I'm unfamiliar with the interface. Anna leaned over and picked one up, turning it over in her hands. They're heavy. He took one himself and felt the weight of it. Yes, they are. He flipped it over and studied the backside, then the edges. You know what I don't see? Anna narrowed her eyes and scrutinized her own unit. No logo. Exactly. Feeney always imprints one on all their units. Which means one of 2 things. Either this is a special unmarked badge, or they weren't created by Feeney at all. Daniel considered these possibilities. I'm going with the second option. There's no reason I can think of that Feeney wouldn't mark an MMD. They're the only game in town and couldn't be anonymous if they wanted. But beyond all that, these tablets have a crudeness about them. That's why they look so dated. Whoever manufactured them is catching up. And breaking the law. This was true, Daniel knew. Because MMDs were so sensitive and important, Feeney had an exclusive contract with the government, making it illegal for anyone else to develop matter manipulation tech. Feeney traded tight regulations in exchange for a monopoly, a deal that had worked in their favor. Daniel well understood the history of big business in the U.S., and that regulations often served as a tool for larger corporations to push smaller competitors out. Sometimes, those same corporations helped write the rules. He turned the unit in his hands back over to its front side. Let's see where these came from. You can do that? If they have a location log, I can. Give me a minute. As I said, I'm not used to this interface. He explored the tablet, but after some time poking around, he shook his head. I found it, but the first coordinate is at this building. Radon must have wiped it out to safeguard against what I'm trying to do. Figures. I'm going to grab a copy of the data and try to scan for other MMDs like these. Maybe someone forgot to do a reset, and human error could work in our favor for once. Anna shot him a sardonic smile. Human error is often how I do my job. He glanced at her. What do you mean? Often, when we catch the bad guys, it's because they messed up and we noticed, not because we outsmarted them. He shrugged and returned to his examination. Sounds like you outsmarted them to me. I suppose that's one way to think about it. He put the device down, then ran a quick mod to remove their fingerprints and reposition everything back where it had been. Let's go. I'm going to initiate a scan for other MMDs like this. Maybe we'll get lucky. In the meantime, let's find your stolen tablets. They started walking again, and as they did, Daniel surveyed the stacks of the strange, non-Feeny MMDs that filled the room. His data lens connected to some at random, but each had its location logs reset, apparently coming into existence in the warehouse. 2 doorways later, they reached another large room, almost identical to the previous ones they'd passed through, with the same shelves organized in rows. However, the MMDs here had the typical Feeny aesthetic and logo. The lot they were interested in lay pushed up against the far left wall, stacked in a handful of crates. As they drew close, Anna turned to him. This is them? From the 5th? Yes, 40 MMD tablets. Let's get one out and have a look. When she arrived at the nearest crate, she popped the lid and peered inside, shining a light from her data lens that caught the Feeny logos and caused them to glint. She pulled a device out, and he reached for another, connecting to it as he picked it up. He tapped the logo. At least these are from Feeny. That fits. They originated from a Feeny factory a few miles east of the city before they went to programming and then the distribution center. Daniel brought up the location log and immediately knew they had the right tablets. He was about to show it to Anna when he heard her blow out a breath of satisfaction. She'd already seen it. It's all here, from the traveling out toward the port, to the reversal, to the routing and rerouting of the buses. I wonder if we can tell who the buyer was supposed to be. Daniel considered this. Not from the tablet, but it could be in their inventory data. Let me check. He switched back to the building system and drilled into the MMD's details. Looks like they have a name recorded. Suzanne Lewis. If you want to run her down after all this is over, that's the lead. I'll be optimistic and say yes to that. Daniel returned to the MMD, digging through its contents. She eyed him curiously. What are you looking for? I'm not sure, but it seems odd to me for Radon to be involved in some kind of black market deal. They have enough clients to keep them busy, so why take on a risk like this? Anna frowned. That's a good point. It is odd for them to be dealing in stolen goods. Daniel worked for a minute, then put the tablet down and reached into the crate to pick up another. Interesting. She looked at him, head tilted and brow furrowed. What did you find? A tracker. Long term, no expiration. Like what Black Ice did that led us to Ben Jacobs? Like that. Rivera, the modder who did the work on these, didn't mention putting a tracker in these. She wouldn't admit it unless she had to, but I'm certain she did it. In fact, I'd hazard a guess it was the most important thing they had her do. It didn't surprise him that Rivera hadn't admitted to installing a tracker. On the modding scene, getting caught doing that would result in a swift blackballing. Only touch what's necessary for the mod, was the mantra. Even criminals had their rules, and Rivera wouldn't have told on herself unless she had to. He held up the second tablet. This one has a tracker too. They're well hidden, and I only found them because I'm looking. He paused to consider their significance. What if Radon was setting a trap? A trap? For this Lewis person? Who was she that they'd care? I have no idea. She grunted. Big help you are. He smiled back weakly. Hey, I found the trackers. You're the investigator. You figure out what they mean. Hopefully I'll have the chance to. But we've invested too much time in this already. Daniel had to agree and put the tablet back down. We should move on. As interesting as this is, it hasn't gotten us any closer to finding Robertson's client. She nodded. I'm not sure where to go next. Surely with all this equipment, there's something else to find. She started packing the tablets away while Daniel brought up the inventory list again. This floor primarily contains MMDs and PMCs. Above us is the level of the transport dock, and it has several drums containing raw materials. He paused. Of course, that's not surprising in and of itself. Disassembling bulky items saves far more space than storing them in their usable forms. But some of it's a little strange. There's a lot of thallium, which is unusual since it's a material not used in large quantities outside of assembly plants. For example, it's less than 1% of what I'm carrying in my PMC. When I first checked the building inventory, I didn't have a clue why they'd have so much of it, but now I think I have a pretty good idea. Anna cocked her head. You think they're acquiring all of that for assembling the mysterious MMDs? I do. My guess is they have an arrangement. Radon procures the materials, and in return, they get the results at a discount. That way, whoever is doing the assembly can stick with manufacturing, while Radon manages the risk of acquisition. Daniel saw Anna's mind working, considering the implications. When she spoke, her words were careful and slow. What we have is a would-be Feeney competitor assembling MMDs and partnering with Radon to do it. It's illegal, and Shaw will be their fiercest foe if it ever comes to light. Absolutely. Shaw will always oppose anyone trying to compete with Feeney. He hesitated, realizing this was a motive to take her out. But if she weren't around, and people learned that they could purchase MMDs cheaper or with different capabilities, Strickland would be hard-pressed to keep Feeney as a monopoly. Is this the reason Radon tried to have Ben assassinate Shaw? Different capabilities. Anna echoed him, and then her eyes went wide and she crossed her arms. Daniel. What is it? What if this is about more than simply manufacturing MMDs? What if someone is creating them without failsafes? He shook his head skeptically. That's not easy to do. You can't simply remove the failsafe. It would require extensive research and many trials. For what it's worth, the non-Feeney tablets we found earlier had failsafes installed. Anna persisted. But the video, it has been done. And the only reason we thought Feeney did it was the logo and the statements from Renault. But the logo could have been faked, and we already suspect him of lying about a better way. A sinking feeling grew in the pit of Daniel's stomach. I don't like where this is going. I don't either. Not if I'm right that our own government is behind the attack on Shaw. Redmond always wanted her own MMDs. What if she's the one making them? Anna's eyes quivered, almost imperceptibly. That's a terrifying thought. Daniel agreed. If the military had developed the means to assemble unregulated MMDs, it put the whole feud between Redmond and Shaw in a different light. Even more so if they could make them without failsafes. The idea of the military wielding MMDs capable of manipulating human bodies was horrifying. We need to discover where these things are being assembled. If I'm right and those materials are going to an assembly plant, we need to follow a shipment. Anna uncrossed her arms and placed her hands on her hips, the trembling in her eyes gone now. We can do that. All we have to do is put a tracker on one of those shipments. Can you determine which ones will go first? I can. Give me a sec. He returned to his data lens and studied the inventory details. Each entry had shipping information attached, and one of the containers was listed to go out at 9 o'clock a.m. They're all marked for Project Libertas, and there's a shipment moving out tomorrow. Project Libertas. That's the kind of name a patriot like Kathleen Redmond would come up with. It is. So how are we going to put a tracker on this shipment? We're going to walk up and stick one on the container. But first, we need to assemble one. I assume you've got something for that? Daniel simpered. Of course, anything for you, my love. He turned serious. We don't want it to be noticeable, so let's get eyes on the container first. From there, I'll decide what kind of tracker will be easiest to hide. Okay, let's go. She began moving, and he followed. They took the stairs, but before they exited onto the 4th floor, Anna hesitated. We'll want to be concealed now. No talking. Got it. He triggered his concealment mod, and she did the same. They were close enough that to his eyes it did nothing but blur her outline. The walls and ceiling of the top floor were similar to the one below it. However, it lacked shelving and featured far more open space. Daniel assumed a greater volume of traffic and the constant repositioning of shipments required more area for maneuvering. The rooms farthest from the transport dock held drums of bland, mundane materials. He thought it likely these were from disassembled office furniture and the like. As they progressed, he observed that the cylindrical containers closer to the dock held higher concentrations of thallium and other more specialized resources used for assembling MMDs. An Office Solutions logo marked each one. Anna pulled up short before the last doorway. Daniel peeked inside and saw a security office high up in a corner of the room. The glassed-in office provided a view over the many shipping drums near the dock. A dark-haired woman in a purple uniform was visible through the windows, but only from her shoulders up. Anna stirred beside him, and he turned to look at her. She stared back at him intently, asking a silent question. He acknowledged her with his eyes, then got to work. It was time to assemble the tracker. He first identified the drum they needed to track, snapped an image of it to feed into his program, then triggered his bracelets to initiate the assembly process. Soon, he held a small blue square a fraction of an inch thick that would blend in and go unnoticed. Anna could stick it underneath the drum, and no one would ever notice it was there. He handed it to her, and she made a "wait here" gesture before beginning a slow creep forward. Daniel watched her move, and as the distance between them grew, she twinkled into nothingness. The concealment mod was doing its work. Looking up at the security room, he realized how exposed he felt. It unnerved him. He tried to make himself believe the woman within couldn't see him, but he found it hard to trust the mod. The fact that he'd written it only served to increase his nerves, aware as he was of his own fallibility. Anna's movements were now invisible to him, though if he looked closely, he could see a place where the air distorted with refracted light. In a little over 2 minutes, she reappeared beside him, motioning for him to follow. They made their way to the stairwell, and when they got one flight down, she clicked off her concealment mod. Easy as that. He did the same. No problems getting it attached? Nope, stuck it right underneath. No one's ever going to find it. He exhaled a long breath, mentally exhausted from the evening. Great. Let's get back to the safe house. I'm done with this place. I am too. As the tension in Daniel's joints dissipated, he became aware of his hurting jaw again. He lifted his fingers to it, applying a gentle touch. Had it been only hours earlier when Robertson had hit him? Time felt distorted and surreal. He only knew they needed to get home and try to rest before the morning came and the tracker started moving.